Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome Sharon Shooter, Kirsten Hammerberg, Hawa Arsala, en conversation avec, in conversation with Alain Sylvain.
Welcome C2. This is welcome from all over the world. This is the third day of the 9th edition of C2. We're about to have a really rich and interesting conversation we're going to talk about brand activism, going beyond hashtags. I'm excited to welcome you three to have this conversation. Do you mind quickly introducing yourselves? Hawa, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Hawa Arsala. I'm the Director of Creative Strategy and Cultural Intelligence at Viacom CBS Velocity. That's a mouthful, but we're a group of critical thinkers and strategists who care about the intersection of what matters in culture and what matters to marketers.
Awesome. Sharon?
Hi, my name is Sharon Chuta, and I'm the founder of Oma Beauty. I'm also the founder of Pull Up for Change, which is a grassroots organization that fights for economic opportunities, equality, equity for the Black community.
Awesome. And Kirsten?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this conversation today. I'm Kirsten Hammerberg from Sid Lee. I'm a co-leader of our brand innovation studio. I lead programs and projects related to organizational innovation, business and experience design, and huge proponent of next generation partnerships and co-creation and collaboration in business.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. For those that are listening, we urge you to drop some questions, share some questions right now. Feel free to drop them in, and then towards the end, we'll go through these questions. So to set the tone, let me just read the prompt that we have here for this panel. The title is Brand Activism, Going Beyond Hashtags. And the description is, until recently, being part of social justice activism was a risk few brands were willing to take. The year 2020 changed that. From racial and gender power imbalances to climate and political issues, brands are taking a stance and turning purpose into action with mixed results. In this discussion between leading marketers and branding experts, learn how, if done right, brands do have the power to affect societal change and the ways in which they can back up their values through measurable action. So let's talk about it. I'm going to ask one quick question, and maybe Hawa, you can kick us off. Do brands really have the power to affect societal change?
Yes, I think that's a really big question. And I think that brands for the longest time have been really trepidatious about stepping into this territory. But as consumers have grown to be shareholders and stakeholders in brands and companies and are themselves turning into, branding experts, brands themselves, and are competing in this sort of marketplace of attention, I think they are calling on big companies, corporations, and brands to activate and intersect into social and cultural issues. And I think we've seen a rise in that this year, especially our work at Viacom CBS. We've been working on the 2020 effect and the ways in which the cultural moments of this year have really galvanized people and there is a demand now for people to be responsive inside of brands to their communities externally. And 85% of Gen Z, we've found, want brands to participate in social issues. And of that percentage, 85% also believe that brands who do participate in social movements earn their respect. And so we see in America a lot of legislation coming up that is, pushing brands more so into the political and social fabric. There is a huge effect that brands can have, and with that comes responsibility and accountability.
Right, and feel free to jump in at any point, Sharon and Kirsten. But I think you set up the next question really well. Do brands really have the right to be activists? Is that Sharon? Do you want to take that? Is that possible?
Yes. Look, I think it depends, right, on the brand's values and the authenticity. And it also depends on the issue. So let's take, for instance, the Black Lives Matter issue and the issue about economic inequality. Now, this is not an issue of whether the brands want to participate or not. This is a fact that they are one of the biggest perpetuators of this problem by not providing employment to the Black community. In that regard, you're not even being an activist. It's asking you to do the right thing. So in a lot of social issues, there are movements like, pay up, right? Which is all about, the way factory workers are being treated, how they're being used. This is pretty much modern day slavery perpetuated by the biggest brands in the world, H&M, Nike, Adidas. So for me, it's like there's even one part about brands being activists, but there's a whole step before we go there, because right now, a lot of the movements towards brands is just to get them to do the right things. That's even where it starts from, let alone doing the right things and then taking a kind of moral superiority to coach people on what to do. And I think right now, brands are not quite there yet, where there are a lot of brands who can really stand it. I mean, look at Nike as an example. When Black Lives Matter, they were very, active, but it was all performative, because immediately we started poking a hole at the substance of it to go, hey, what does your C-suite look like? What does your head office actually look like? You can see how quiet they've been for the rest of the movement. So I think right now, brands really, because a lot of them are not doing it right, the first focus really before starting to become an activist is really clean your house. You have to clean your house first before you actually jump in to lead the way. And I think the brands who can lead the way, there are some brands that are real founder-led brands who can lead the way. Those brands definitely have the rights to, because they have the authority to speak with confidence in that area, and they have tremendous resources through their platform to effect societal change. And let's also remember that right now, for this generation, religion doesn't have the power that it used to be. People used to go to church to go congregate and socialize. Politics doesn't have the power it used to be, because now everybody knows it's a whole lot of baloney, right? So people are now looking to brands as that culture, as that tribe, as that religion. And this is where they have a higher expectation of brands than they've ever had before. So all those factors coming together. But I would say brands, firstly, right now, a lot of the push talking to brands is really for them to do the right thing, and not really for them to even be activists or teach anybody what to do, because right now they don't even know what to do.
No, that's great. That's great. And we often say that people identify with brands more than they identify with other institutions. Kirsten, in what you're seeing, so we see there's this inventory question that Sharon posed, which is brands taking stock in how they contribute to social issues. And then there's this activism stage, where brands are actually taking a stand. Do you see that among your clients and what you see in the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back almost with a definition around what brand is. With the work that I've been doing for so long, there's almost been a decoupling of brand from business, and it's been treated as a marketing tool. So I think that fundamentally going back to the core and truly understanding what a brand means. And for us, it's, very much a social contract of a business, and how it governs its organization, how it connects with people, how, it shows up in the communities that it's in. So fundamentally, I think when we get into this conversation around, does a brand have a role to play or responsibility within activism, I think it comes back to when we talk about brands systemically as a social contract and as a manifestation of the business, that's really where we start to say, yes, there is a responsibility, and there are leaders and growing evidence of conversations around new stakeholder capitalism that's really helping to shape, what a new baseline can be in that space. So I think fundamentally, we are seeing the shift, and the conversation that we always start with is, again, going back around intention. And if you're having this conversation, why are you having this conversation, and where does this motivation and intention come from? And when it really truly is systemic, and a deep reflection from a business standpoint versus, hey, this is an opportunity to stand out in market and it's a strong point of difference, we kind of know if this really is more performative versus truly talking about action. What is the action a brand can take to move forward?
Great. I mean, I think we see the performative nature of those type of acts, and I can't help, maybe my cynicism is showing here, but I'm suspect of a lot of big brands, and just thinking about how committed they are to this. Sharon, you pointed out some brands do it well. I think you mentioned founder-driven brands. Can you give us some hope? What are some examples beyond Uoma Beauty, perhaps? Some examples of brands that are doing this properly in your mind?
Well, unfortunately, they're not many, right? I'm actually sitting here trying to actually think about one, and really, they're not many brands that
Yeah.
where they, as the brand themselves, because like I said, right now we're going through a moment where brands are scrambling to really clean up their house. They're literally trying to clean up shit. And so they're really focused on that, right? But let me give you an example of a brand, even in a different area. So let's take Sammy Mirror, right? Sammy Mirror Vintage is a brand that sells sustainable clothing. So she makes clothing out of recycled material, and for her, it's all about reused wear. And so her activism is about the amount of waste that is generated in fashion, right? Her entire business model has been built on it, but she didn't build that business model because she just wanted to build a business model and profit of it, right? Her real motivation of it was to really spearhead this conversation around sustainability, about the dangers of fast fashion. And I start to imagine if we were having a big forum and a conversation about waste, sustainability in fashion, she would be the one who's taking the front seat, not H&M, not Nike, not Pretty Little Things, not Boohoo, not Fashion Nova, and so that's why I go like this smaller, that's what we see right now. It's the smaller founder-led brands. And the reason is a lot of these people, this was their motivation for going into business. They went in there to clean up the house and to clean up the slate. And those types of brands we're seeing have that authenticity and that credibility to go out there and really lead the way, because that was actually the motivation of the brand from starters. Most heritage brands, I don't know a good example of a heritage brand that can really stand up and lead, because like I said, in the heritage of it, business was done differently 20 years ago. They didn't even let women in properly, let alone, all the social issues that we're going through. So a lot of them are morphing and they're trying to learn and they're trying to get educated on how to do business post this really, macho, Western, egocentric kind of business model that is most of the big corporations around the world. So personally, I would go, I don't know any big corporation I can point my fingers to, because most of them who are even in it having the conversations is purely performative. P&G is one that just got called out again, right? They've been launching campaigns for the last 3 years all about racial equality and racial equity, but refuse to release any meaningful diversity data. And their shareholders just held them at standpoint at their last annual general meeting, insisting that they release useful data, useful metrics, how they're performing and what they intend to do, and they refuse to. So you think about a company that has invested as much money as P&G in all these commercials around social justice and social equity, refusing to clean their own homes. And this is a problem because they are the ones perpetuating this problem. And so right now the consumers are going, hey, go past branding and marketing, and actually pull up for real. That's when you're seeing them keeping quiet. And I think that's an issue. And that's why I go, for a lot of the big corps, I really can't think of one big corp that I can point a finger to and go, hey, they're doing the well, lead the way. And right now it's really those indies, it's really those founders who already their mission was that before they even went into business, that are leading the charge and leading the way.
Mm. Yeah, you're dropping knowledge bombs, Sharon, so much so that you made Hawa disappear. It's amazing. Hopefully she'll come back. Hopefully she'll come back. So Kirsten, you work with big brands. What are you optimistic? Do you see potential signs of progress, or some brands that are showing up the right way?
I do, and I hear and acknowledge everything that Sharon said, and I think I'm a practical optimist in that my hope, or a lot of the work that I do, is how to take the small steps with large organizations. So I don't think I would sit here and say across the board there's organizations check. But there are organizations that I think are putting really meaningful steps forward. So I always go back to, and I know it's a little bit of a cliche reference, but is Patagonia. And I think that they have, really been founded as an activist brand. I think that, within the current situation, they have stepped up or recognized their lack of effort that they've put into a lot of, the social equity, the fact that they are a white-led organization whose recreation is based on, stolen native land, as it is quoted within their outward statement around support for creating a anti-racist organization. So I think that I look at organizations who have really strong roots and credibility within something like activism related to sustainability, and how they can openly acknowledge that they have failed and haven't done what's right in certain areas, but they are committed to making that change. So I think that we can look to interesting examples, and we can look at how they're showing up in this conversation today, not to say we've done well or look for excuses, but to really say we're looking at how, changes can be made.
Yeah, it's an interesting framework you painted there. So, acknowledging ills that puts it lightly, makes it feel small when it's actually systemic and problematic. But acknowledging the past, let's call it, and promising a future. And you could argue when brands put out Black Lives Matter or something, it's very future forward. But does there need to be a reckoning? I know what you think, Sharon. You made it clear. Can you give us an example of like how brands can acknowledge their participation in where we sit today from a social and environmental perspective?
Yeah, for me, I think we're in business, right? And the first thing you learn in business school is anything that cannot be measured cannot be improved, right? Which is why the angle I took to this in terms of getting brands to participate was really starting to measure. If you measure it, you can track it, you can see where you're falling short, you can analyze it, and then you can create solutions. When I see brands who continue saying, oh yeah, we're listening, we're learning, we're this and we're that, but they don't even have a diversity report that is meaningful. There's a difference between just saying, oh, I hired 2 Black people, to going, okay, this is my pipeline. These are my pipeline issues. This is where it's dropping off. I don't have enough Black interns. I don't have enough, or there are many Black entry-level people, but they're not moving upwards. What's broken in my system? What's fundamentally broken? So I go, it's very easy to release a statement. It's very easy to craft something and go committed to change like everybody wrote down. But what are the active steps you're taking every single day? And what is the business priority? Is that number 1 in your top 3 priorities, or is that in your nice to have? How are you tackling this? Is it just about going to hire a chief diversity officer and is their problem? Creating a diversity council and is their problem? Is that what you're really doing? Or are you really digging in to get the hard work done? Are you educating your C-suite first on biases? Are you starting from your leadership team and working that, and then really looking through your whole ecosystem? Very similar to the approach brands took when they really realized the importance of women, right? And look at the improvement we've had in terms of female participation in leadership roles. Look at how many, even government putting in place, quotas and a lot of things like that happen. I think we know what to do, right? Those are the steps that we're taking to get women to participate more in organizations is what has to be taken to allow minorities to participate. So when companies are coming out and saying, I want to do something, it's like, well, you already know what to do if you wanted to do it. So don't just go out there releasing statements. It's about backing that statement and having that true commitment to it and the resilience to make it happen. Because this is another thing I found with companies. They had this intent and all the kind of desire in June, right? Now we're in October and they go like, oh, but I advertised for a role and no Black person applied. So I've tried and it's not working, right? So, so it's about having that, understanding that this is a problem that has taken hundreds of years to create. And we have to continue working at it, chipping at it. This is not a problem you're going to hire BCG, Boston, Bain, or McKinsey to come fix for you. It's a human problem. We have to tackle it with resilience, commitments to do it. And everybody has to be committed to that, not just your chief diversity officer.
Oh, I love that. And it's funny. You're right. It takes 100 or 200 years to build up this momentous organization. You need to spend more than a long weekend on sustaining that change. Wait, I see. Right. Do we have Howard back? Howard, do we have you back or no?
Yeah, I lost my power, but I heard the truth bombs on. I had the audio still, and I heard those truth bombs. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, Sharon really spoke to, and I'm going to ask Kirsten this later on too, or Kirsten jump in whenever you want, but this idea of transparency. I think that's really interesting on the part of companies and brands. Can you talk a bit about why that's important and how brands can act on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think transparency is everything because it goes back to there's no right playbook for this right now. And the organizations who have taken steps forward and either succeeded or I think more accurately failed has learned knowledge that we can then bring forward to other organizations so that we can all kind of take our collective knowledge and advance. I think that there's transparency from the perspective of how do we actually create a culture of sharing? How do we create a culture of openness from business to business and with our employees? And then I think that there's importance for transparency because it is appropriate for consumers and people to hold organizations accountable. So I think transparency plays, many roles within this. And I think, just to build on, great points that Sharon was mentioning around measurement, I think that fundamentally within measurement as well is this notion of how we have to use and look at measurement differently. It's not to kind of say I achieved, but it has to become learned knowledge that helps us actually change the system. So I think we need to look at measurement more across time. And we need to be looking at, not only, diversity, around hiring and recruiting and everything else that we're pointing to, but if we actually pull that back to the organization and start to look at, compensation and attrition and performance and all these other things, and we learn and take data from measurement as a learning tool to really start looking at improvements versus, so often organizations look at measurement as a way to say, yes, we've been successful, so we can move on. So I think that there's a fundamental shift in measurement as well, just in terms of why you're even measuring to begin with.
Ticking the box versus actually learning from the data and doing something about it. Do you have anything to add there, Howard?
Yeah, something you mentioned about, there not really being a playbook for how to move in these moments. And I think a lot of questions brands have is, what can I do? What do I do? Do I have to be the activist? Like, that doesn't actually feel natural to our brand ethos and message. And in our work, Power in Progress, we really looked at how young people are beta testing structures of power and systems of power and using their collective voices to create these demands. And I think for brands who are navigating this new set of expectations and behaviors, we've created 9 different personas for brands to be able to push into, whether it's an activist, or are you connecting people? Are you playing the role of a harmonizer? Or are you a revisionist brand where you have to sort of go into your archives and really look at your history and your past and correct those wrongs and sort of come forward in that sense of transparency and really right those wrongs, because those receipts are out there and young people especially are more focused in putting more intention and attention on structural change. And that's something that I think brands have to navigate in a way that is really difficult at times, but is probably the most important thing, is to look within and inward before projecting outward with comms and messaging and things like that.
Such a good point. Sharon, I know you have a point of view on learning. Organizations learning. I think you mentioned that to me before.
Yes.
Can organizations learn,
yes.
and how does that contribute to this process?
Yes, I mean, you must be a learning organization right now because we are going through seismic changes in society. Everywhere around the world we are. So I think any organization who's not a true learning organization is going to just be obsolete. They're just not going to be here if they don't listen. And I think the key to being a learning organization, and the one thing that organizations have to do differently this time, is a lot of the issues we're looking at in society right now are all human issues. And this is really why organizations are stuck right now, because somehow we've learned how to treat companies almost like they're separate entities, as opposed to they're a collection of people all working towards one goal, right? And all the problems that we have right now are problems that we have to think about really as people first before as business strategists, right? And that's the part that is not connecting for many organizations in terms of how do you take a human problem and tackle it, that it's not kind of a robotic fix. Here is a 4-step plan that is guaranteed to success, because when it's a human problem, it becomes complex. Human issues are always very complex, and there is no straightforward yes and no. It is always a thing about you test, you learn, you adapt. What works for you might not work for the other person. What works for the other person might not. So it's all about each person committing. It's almost like there is no handbook, if you think about it, to finding the perfect partner in a relationship, right? There is no perfect handbook. There is no do this and you're going to find the right husband. And because it's a human thing, it's all about human connection. And this is the problems and the challenges we're facing in the world today. They're mostly human problems and very kind of like problems that are human rights issues. And as such, organizations really have to take a step back and really learn how to really listen, to adapt, to tweak things, to fine tune it. And that can only happen with true commitment. That can only happen with once again, even the C-suite seeing this as a human problem and starting to tackle it that way in terms of this is dealing with, how would I want to be treated? A lot of the problems, for instance, around racial inequities in companies, a lot of them is common sense. Microaggression, common sense. Don't walk up to somebody and tell them the food's stinky, right? I don't need a handbook to give a human being that, right? Don't mistreat somebody just because they look different to you. Common sense. A lot of these things are really just common sense human problems, and as such, there is no real handbook on how to fix, because you really have to look at your own organization, see where you're falling short, even in the culture. That, hey, my culture is an Anglo-centric culture, it's not a shared culture. What do I do about it? That's not really a BCG kind of framework for every company to work, and so I think this is where it is necessary, it's vital almost to survival of organizations as they navigate through this next 5 years, to really fine-tune the way they work and become more human in their nature, which means listening to the people even within that organization, learning, adapting, and understanding the man on top or the woman on top doesn't know it all. And that person on top has to be willing to learn and unlearn. Not just about learning, it's even about unlearning, and then sharing that as they put that vision through the organization.
How, Kirsten, anything to add there? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that point, I think, and I don't know if this is something that was covered before, but for me, it's important to acknowledge that the conversation we're having right now is not new. People have been doing this work for decades. This has been a personal passion and mission of mine for the past decade in my work. And so in that vein of learning, there are people who've come before you who have been doing this work before, and look to them as experts. Invite them in to be a part of the conversation. Brands right now, I think, are having a moment of self-actualization, and brand therapy feels really important. Like, how do you take that human aspect of self-inquiry, of looking inward, and also that sense of compassion that you are lending to not only the rest of your team or your organization or structure, as an example, if you are a leader at an organization, but to your consumers as well. How can you model that behavior of self-inquiry and actualization? Because we're stepping into the space of brand consciousness. Brands and companies have been considered people legally here in the United States. And as we move more towards this humanization of brands and companies, and they are participating as humans in the conversations on social inequities and things like that, there has to be that element of humanity and self-inquiry that pervades every sort of decision that comes out of an organization coming forward in this time.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, brands as humans. It's a really interesting idea. Humans are flawed. Humans make mistakes, and they repair those mistakes. Kirsten, can you speak to that a little bit? There is obviously a fear of change on the part of brands. They're afraid of making mistakes. They're on high alert. They're afraid of being canceled. They're afraid of coming across as tone deaf. What are you seeing when it comes to brands and their humanity and their failures and their successes?
Yeah, absolutely. So fear is real. It's in all of us, and absolutely something that we see overwhelmingly with brands. I think that we use it as an excuse a lot of the time, and it's not an excuse anymore. I think that the organizations that I work with or people that I talk to, it's very much we need to, I think, go back to these models of collaboration and look in this in a way that we're not alone. And I think that really helps to move us forward, that there are people who have experienced this, learned from something, gone through something. But that shift, right, that shift for organizations to go from a culture of expertise, like very much in business, it's like we are experts, we know what we're supposed to do, everything's measured, et cetera. Going back to what Sharon said, the humanity that needs to live in an organization to make this possible doesn't always exist, or, it's in tension with the dominant culture of an organization. So I think that, when we talk about fear, it is something that holds so many of us back. But I think that when we think about things as steps forward, it's not about trying to do everything all at once. It's about having the conversations with the people who can help shepherd you through. And I say that, not only outside partners, but more leaders looking to their teams and the people that work as part of their organization as a way to kind of educate up as being really important. I also think that, fear for a lot of companies is in interesting one when and if you have a truly strong brand. You know, we talk a lot about brand and purpose and values that will guide you in making these decisions and doing what's right. And I think that what we're just finding right now is that so often the values of an organization or the values of the brand are outdated or quite disconnected, or were created because they thought it sounded great or it helped them stand out, versus really being the DNA of the company, of who it is, and having it actually pull through a company to be a tool for decision making, to, you know, shepherd people along this path. So I think, you know, ultimately it's something that holds us back, but it can't be an excuse anymore. And that there's so many things that we can do to take the right steps forward and to create, you know, the right frameworks, so to speak, to help us make decisions, and the right partners. So yeah, I think that it's just no longer an excuse.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Sharon, you had a great story about redemption, you know, about how you can be canceled one day and then the next day something different. You want to speak to that?
Mm-hmm.
And then before you do that, I'm
absolutely.
sorry to interrupt you, Sharon. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Before you do that, really quick, I wanted to let everyone know to drop questions, please, because we'll jump to questions in a minute or two. So go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah. No problem. Yes, no, absolutely. And I think this idea, like, you know, people being so afraid to make mistakes, that's the whole point of being human, you know. And the example I'm going to give you is my brand, I'm a beauty. You know, I'm a human. I come out there, I'm in front of the brand. Doesn't mean we're perfect. We don't make mistakes. This year in February, we launched a palette called, or collection called Carnival, where we were celebrating Carnival from around the world. Now, we got so much backlash from the Caribbean community, or the Afro-Caribbean community, because they thought, you know, I was appropriating their culture. I was the wrong kind of Black. I'm Nigerian. I don't have the authority, you know, to speak about, you know, Carnival. And, you know, it was a big deal. Like, I mean, we were getting dragged on Twitter, being slaughtered everywhere, you know, because I had used Jackie Oina and Patrick Stan. Jackie Oina is a Nigerian. So they were like, oh my God, you're stealing our culture. You're taking it away from us. I mean, I didn't see it that way. I saw that I was celebrating their culture, right? And so in that moment, you know, it's easy to just get very emotional and, you know, defensive, and this is what it is. What I did was, of course, I'm a human being. I got angry at first, and then you take a chill pill and you take a step back, and then you listen to what's the points they were trying to make. And the point is, we never see ourselves in the spotlight. And when we do see ourselves, it would have been great to have had one of us included in that conversation. And so we learned that. We've taken that note and we walked away, and we've learned that, you know, our intent was good. And the good thing is they knew our intent was good. It's just sometimes social media has a way of, you know, getting the communication across. So we took that on board. Now, 4 months later, I became the hero of the world. Oh my God, Shama loves Black people. 4 months ago, I hated Black people. And so this is the reason why you cannot as an organization be living in constant fear of, oh my God, you're going to get dragged. Nobody's going to get it perfect all the time. Rihanna's Fenty Beauty has been dragged. You know, when they did the Geisha Chic, they had to pull that collection out. They still have business. People still trust Rihanna. People still buy from her. They just apologized. Same thing with the Savage Times Fenty show that just happened, when the Muslim community were quite angry because of one of the prayers was actually just put through as a DJ set. And it was very offensive to that community. She acknowledged it. She apologized. It was accepted, and they moved on. And this is part of being a learning organization, understanding that we're not going to get everything right, but our intent is there to listen, to learn, and adapt, because that's really what the consumers are asking for. They're asking you to please do better. And so even for me, for instance, I'm doing Carnival again. So I'm not going to not do it again. I'm doing it again, but this time I'm doing it a bit different. And also, it changed how I looked at my whole campaign structures. Normally when I do campaign, I do it from a whole, we're all one Afro, Black is Black, we're all one. And then now I've learned about it, that there's certain subcultures that really never get into the spotlight. And if you ever wanted to touch those subcultures, it is very important to really put them front and center to drive that conversation, because it is much, much deeper to them, as I learned very quickly. So I think organizations really need to get over that fear, because if you have the right intent, like I have the right intent, so there was no option where I'm going to stop batting for my people just because I got dragged on social media. It was not even on the table. It was about, okay, get this right. How can I do better? How can I take that, tweak the business, and get it done better next time? And that really needs to be the approach, as opposed to I'm not going to do anything because I need to be perfect all the time, and then for the fear that I'm going to get canceled. Actually, you're going to get canceled for the things that you're not even thinking about, to be honest. So I think, yes, organizations have to be prepared to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's great. It shows some. Go ahead, Howard.
Oh, I just love when you share this story, Sharon, because I think it's so indicative of what more brands need to be able to do. And something that I've been thinking about a lot this year has been little deaths. And I think the fear of being canceled is the fear of death in a lot of ways, that my business won't exist anymore, that nobody will care about my products or will want to buy these things anymore. But I think the more we are able to accept these little deaths that happen, whether it was our routines at the beginning of lockdown and, you know, our commutes to the office and things like that, or it was something that was a bit more grave and the loss of actual human life. I think for us to be able to not just as humans, but brands as humans as well, to accept these little deaths and to grieve them and move past this place of potential shame or, anger and frustration. I think it's a part of what is embedded into the brand landscape now. And we have to be able to move through the grief and come out on the other side into a space of praise. How are we praising people? How are we praising our community? How are we praising the consumer base that we are, lending a voice to and also borrowing inspiration from? And I think, little deaths has been something I've been thinking about a lot this year.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It moves me. That's power. I love it. So we're gonna jump to some questions. And Kirsten, I'm gonna ask you the first one. There are maybe 3 or 4 questions right now that are about what employees can do. What role do employees have in this work? What role do they have in changing organizations and influencing the C-suite?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think, like most answers, it's not a one size fits all, because so much of it depends on the existing structure of an organization and how employees are currently part of that process or not. I think that, one thing I want to point out is just the power of employees in terms of making brand purpose possible. And one thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is when you actually look at the results of brand purpose as a kind of strong tool for an organization, it only manifests when it's pulled through a company and when people have access to using it as a tool to make decisions. So I'm just saying that as like a starting point, that employees are crucial to this. So it's not only what employees need to do, but it's also how I think leaders need to think about employees as true agents and partners in the business. Employees in and of themselves, the way that, we spend time working with people and thinking about, employee experience is, first of all, not being, kind of going back to fear, afraid to have a voice. And I think that for so often, we live in organizational cultures where to actually speak up, there's fear. There's fear for what may happen as an outcome of that conversation. So I think in the most small and subtle way, it's how do you find like-minded partners within the organization who share the same beliefs, and how do you create a platform for yourself, or if there's existing platforms, just starting to speak up. And if you're a part of an organization that is compassionate, that cares, that is human, there will be an opportunity for you to participate and for you to get involved. So I think the first thing is that you are not kind of a bystander of this. You are an active agent in this, that your role matters. And I think that a lot of employees know it, but I think that so often a lot of leadership may not necessarily recognize, the true value in that. So in the very small way, it's just how do you speak up and how do you use the platforms that are there or create new platforms to have your voice heard?
Yeah, I love that, Kirsten, because we are seeing employees and kind of, I think you alluded to how companies are new government, the new institutions, and we're seeing employees rising up like citizenry, like citizenship. They're being activists within their own organizations. That's so cool. Hawa and Sharon, do you have anything to add to that? The idea of employees as internal forces of good?
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay, no, I was going to say, I think employees play like a tremendous role and can play a tremendous role. If you take Pull Up for Change, for example, when we launched our Pull Up for Shut Up Challenge out, challenging, corporations to release their diversity numbers, this battle was really won by employees. A lot of people saw the social media things that was happening, but that wasn't really where that war happened, the war happened internally. People were revolting. People were speaking up. People were, we saw Adidas employees take to the streets and go and protest against in front of Adidas going, no, you must do better. We can't take this. So I think employees play a huge role. And the other thing I would say to people is don't be afraid. At the end of the day, there is something called, culpability and complacency. Is the reason why I left corporate. Is the reason why I left my job. Because at a point I was like, I cannot sit back here and just take it, whilst hoping the company will change, knowing very well that this company has no intention to change. So I think employees can also play the role by switching and going to the employers who are really serious about the causes and the purposes that they want. Because if employers start struggling to hire good talent, just because of their practices, change is going to come too, right? So it comes from, and that's why I go in this conversation about creating a fairer and a more just world. Everybody has a role to play. Consumers voting with their dollars, employees, saying, hey, I'm not going to work with a company that is not aligned with my values. No matter how much money I get paid, I'm not going to do it. And people in public office really trying to put policy in place because it's really, really important to start protecting underserved and minority communities. So I think employees play a huge role, both in just speaking up, but also don't ever be afraid to walk away. And I've seen many, many people do that. I was actually on a call with somebody from a company I'm not going to name. They came to me wanting to partner with my brand. I told them, I'm not going to partner with you. I don't care how much money I'm going to make from this deal because your company are awful. I would not have anything to do with you. And she left that call, called me back and said, I just put in my resignation after our call because I realized that every single thing you said was correct and I cannot live in a company or continue to perpetuate this. And, it sounds very extreme, it sounds very bold, but some people who are bold enough to do those things shouldn't be afraid to do that and walk away to companies where your values are actually aligned, because even you as a human being are going to be much better, but that's also your contribution to the cause.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, and I think you illustrated it really beautifully, that this is the time to be audacious. If you are an employee at a company, we are in isolation here. And so to not be occupying the same physical space where, normal things like intimidation or, being in a conference room or boardroom where there might be leadership and you're afraid to speak up. We're in the comfort of our own homes. We're able to sort of come back to this place of what is important to me. And if there's any time right now where brands are searching for answers, where leaders who've occupied these spaces for a long time are searching for answers in this new world, it's a time for employees to be extremely audacious, but also to find your allies. If you are a person of color, a Black person within an organization, this should not have to be your labor entirely in order to bring these conversations to the fore. So I think it's really important to find those allies, whether it's leadership allies or other people on the team who can help you and distribute the labor of really bringing these conversations to the fore. Our organization has been doing a lot of work. I'm actually really proud of our team for having a series of conversations on race, for putting out a new manifesto that is anti-racist and explicitly anti-racist, and for now creating workshops on how our creative teams and strategy teams can start thinking more inclusively and practicing more inclusively rather than just talking about it.
No, that's great. Action obviously more powerful than words. Kirsten, do you have any examples? And I would ask all of you, it's hard to think of examples, kind of like what Sharon said early on. It's hard to think of some positive examples, but do you have any examples of companies or policies or moments when that internal action is really worked?
Sure. Yeah. I think an interesting example of an organization right now is kind of goes back to the beginning part of the conversation where we were talking about examples and what brands are standing up in an interesting way. And I'll use an example, the response of IBM and pulling out of facial recognition software. And I thought that was an interesting example of an organization who stood up and said, there is a whole industry that is very powerful and there's a lot of good that can come from it. But right now, it is being used in a way that is contributing to, racial profiling. It is sacrificing, a lot of questions around transparency and trust. And so it was just an interesting example for me. It was an organization who was listening to people internally, who made an outward and bold decision to essentially pull out of a whole line of business and really say, we're supporting legislation around how to create proper education in this space and how to really create the proper use of something that can be so, bold and powerful. So I'm just using that as an example of an organization who you wouldn't necessarily consider to be an activist brand, who made a really big commitment by listening to its people, pulling out of business, and then also kind of getting involved from, a legislation and government standpoint as well.
That's great. Any other examples?
Yeah.
It's always a hard question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly. And for me, I won't even give an example from this moment in time. I'm actually going to give, because a lot of times right now, what frustrates me with companies is almost this idea of we don't know what to do. We're stuck, right? But it's like this situation, we've tackled it so many times in different iterations. I talk about female participation, especially, and right now the situation I'm talking about is specifically the crisis or the pandemic of Black employment in this country, right? And both in company culture, microaggressions, why people don't stay, why they leave, the lack of promotion and everything. And I'm going to give an example of what international companies do when they go into countries that are majority Black. So I'm going to give you the example of Shell and how they get their white employees to stay in a country that is like literally 98% Black, if not 99% Black. Here's what they do. When expats arrive into the country, the entire organization already have training structures. They have already been set up. So as a Nigerian, I was educated about different cultures, about, hey, this is what American culture is like. This is what British culture is like. This is what Australia is like, la, 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 la. There is so much focus on education about cultural nuances. There is so much instances where every single month you have to do like training, you have to do all these team building, cultural building activities to assimilate it to Western culture so the Westerners can feel better, right? So, and this is why the expats stay. So they come in there and it's already a warm and friendly place because I'm already mindful that, hey, context and all of this, and you don't mean this and you don't mean that and whatever, right? Now, what I don't understand is why those models and the same company that do these things overseas and prep people, and he's been very successful in keeping people who, coming into an organization is a cultural shock, staying and feeling part of the team and growing and being promoted and being developed, why they can't take the same infrastructure and ecosystem in here to properly train people on nuances on culture, make the culture a shared culture. So you go to Shell Nigeria, it is not a Nigerian culture, it is literally a shared culture, right, within that company. And why we're not able to just lift those same frameworks that have actually worked well when it's the reverse and do it here, that's a point that's mind-boggling. So I give that example because that's a good example. It just happens in the reverse. And now we just need to take that model, put it here and nip it, and do those same things because we've seen that they work and they work very effectively in retention. And since they started that, I think this program started probably about 25 years ago, the retention of expat workers grew exponentially because they felt at home, they felt welcome, they were in a culture that was accepting of them, which is one of the biggest problems we're screaming here in corporate America. It is a culture that is not accepting of other people, and it's worked. So I'll give that example, even though it's not an American context, because that's the success story of how people have been able to merge cultures together and they've been able to work together really well and build and grow.
Oh, I love that example because it actually, in order to truly understand it here, the reverse really tells the story. It is a story about colonialism and white supremacy, but we don't have time for that right now. But I do think we need to wrap up. I'm afraid I'm sure there's a lot more we can learn from you three. I'm really grateful for this really rich and interesting conversation. Your expertise really shines through here. So thank you for doing that, and thank you all for all the questions. We're really grateful for that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Hawa, Sharon, and Kirsten. I hope this was inspiring and exciting for you too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. See you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Mesdames et messieurs, c'est maintenant l'heure du lunch. Les activités reprendront cet après-midi. En tout temps, vous pouvez continuer le réseautage via Braindate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now lunchtime. Join us again this afternoon. At all times, you can continue networking by booking a brain date.
Good, thank you.
Good, thank you.
Great, beautiful
Really good.
conversation.
It's actually a good thing that my headphone just about